since we're finishing up the study of Joseph, and I'll try to make myself a note as we shift and go to major characters, I like to give things that you can put in your collection just as reminders of Bible study. I've never been the type of person that just study without some kind of visual aid or some kind of visual reminder. It's the reason that I send the cards out at the beginning of the month, or I pass those cards out, just something to give you kind of a mental jog to say, oh yeah, we studied that. And if in fact you need to go back and refer to some things, then you have these little trinkets, whatever you want to call them, that you can refer back to. And so those help me, and I don't know if it helps you, but I wanted you to have that. Let's continue in our study of the life of Joseph this morning. Again, this series we're calling Timeless Lessons from the Bible, specifically the Old Testament characters. These lessons that I call timely and timeless. Timely, what did it mean when it was written at the time? Timeless, what things can we glean? What things can we understand? What things can we apply to our life today that we can improve our relationship with God, and also give us further clarification when it comes to study the Word of God. You remember Paul said the things that were written aforetime were written for our learning. He says through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. That's why we study the Bible. We want to look for patience. We want to look for comfort in the Scriptures, and we want to derive a sense of hope. Genesis chapter 39 will actually move forward just a little bit today. I wanted to give you a sense of the lifelines in the life of Joseph, and I'll finish up my closing wrap up that we started on last week. Let's begin with prayer, and then we'll just jump right back on into it. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for all of your blessings. Thank you for blessing us to be here. We're thankful, Father, for those who made the spiritual investment, invested the time, either in person or joining us online to study the Word. Help us to always not just study your Word, Lord, to be doers of your Word. Help us to always look for the meaning and the message through your Word to make us better people, better servants of yours, so that we can take the marvelous light of the gospel shining in the world and really help others to know what salvation looks like, and to teach the gospel so that all men can be saved. Forgive us of our sins and our shortcomings. We thank you, and we love you for this and all your blessings. In Jesus' name, amen. Genesis 39 is where we were, but this one I kind of took as a result of the handout that I gave you. And when you really look at, you can either look on your handout or look on the screen, the lifelines of Joseph. If you take Joseph's life and most of the major characters of the Old Testament, if you take their life kind of does the same thing that ours does. It kind of ebbs and flows. There's certain days that we have highs spiritually, and then certain days we have lows. And so it's what we do to maintain consistency with God during the whole time that really speaks to us about our relationship with him. You remember Joseph was given that cloak of many colors, that gift from his father, and he had strange dreams. And remember, he told them about the dreams. And, needless to say, I don't think the brothers took it so well. Matter of fact, I know they didn't, because they laid ambush for him. And after this coat of many colors, remember, they set a trap for him, and they put him in a pit and took that same precious coat and dipped it in animal's blood and took it back to Dad and said, oh, by the way, what do you draw from this conclusion? Well, yeah, he must be dead. So they sold him into slavery. And the one brother, do you remember the one brother who said, don't kill him, but let's put him in a pit and sold him into slavery? Who was that? Anybody remember? Was that Reuben? That was Reuben. Okay. He came back later to get him out, and he was not there. So they sold him into slavery. And then 39 of Genesis keeps using the phrase over and over again. But the Lord was with Joseph. But the Lord, no matter if he was up high on a spiritual plane, or if he was low, the Lord was with Joseph. My takeaway from that is just that. The Lord's going to be with me. The Lord's going to be with you. The Lord's going to be with us, no matter if we're up high on a spiritual plane or if we're in the valley. Typically, we tend to let God's hand go when we're up high, and we grab and reach for it again when we're down low. But he was imprisoned. And while he was in prison, he actually, after he was imprisoned, after the events that led to with Mrs. Potiphar, he got thrown into prison. And our talk last week got me to thinking. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. Go to Genesis 39 and verse 13. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But remember, we said that this may not have been her first time in laying a trap for the house servant. Verse 13, when she, Mrs. Potiphar, saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed, and when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. Liar, liar, pants on fire. But I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to bother it. I've had too much fun with that. But what I found interesting, the comments that you guys made last week, this may not have been her first rodeo. This may not be an isolated incident. This, in fact, may have been a pattern. And you also helped me last week. This was a setup. He kept going day by day, doing his job, and just so happened that one particular day, nobody else was in the house except him and her, and then, of course, the incident went down. What's the takeaway from all of that? Just because somebody says something one way, you got to watch their actions. And we keep saying this. We've been saying this from the beginning. You know, actions have consequences. Actions speak louder than words. But how do I handle things in my life? And I call this one the setup. How do I handle things in my life when I've been set up and I've been treated unfairly? I still have to maintain my integrity. I still got to maintain my faith in God. I still got to maintain my allegiance to him. But what I find interesting, and we talked about this last week also, look down at verse number 16. She kept the cloak beside her until the master came home, and then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought to us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and he ran out of his house. When his master heard the story that his wife was saying, this is how your slave treated me, he burned with anger. I find it interesting. The scripture does not say he burned with anger at Joseph. See, y'all messed me up last week. See, when y'all mess me up, I go home and I get deeper in the Bible. I study and read even more. That point you made was very, very true. It does not say that he was mad at Joseph. In fact, we talked about this a little bit last week. It could be, I think it was either Mandy or Jerry, and I can't remember who. It could be that he was caught between a rock and a hard spot. He's got to do something for this punishment, for this act, but at the same time, I'm not totally convinced he believed Mrs. Potiphar. So ultimately, guess what? Joseph is now cast into prison. And I think whoever said it last week, I think he was caught between a rock and a hard spot. And I think that's exactly true. Didn't exactly believe Mrs. Potiphar, but had to do something because it would look like favoritism. And really that was punishable back then. If attempted rape, that's death. But he didn't do it. In fact, he put him in prison. And like I mentioned last week, this particular prison was still close to the house where he was working. If you look back in biblical history, it's still pretty close to the house. So there might be credibility on both sides of that. Now, let me ask this. Let me just, what does this speak to us? And we'll keep reading. I want to get into 40. What does this say to you about integrity? If you had to teach or tell somebody about integrity, doing the right thing, what would this say to you? What would you say? What does this speak to you? And then we'll go over to 40 about integrity. What's this say about integrity? Yeah, yeah. And we told our children that growing up. I mean, some variation of the story. You know, if everybody else is jumping off the cliff, you're going to jump too. Some variation of that particular story. We've got to do the right thing. Even if anybody's watching or nobody's watching, the right thing to do is the right thing to do. Not only, and it doesn't matter how big or how small. If you got too much change back at the store, take it back. You know, it's not yours. We got to do the right thing, even when nobody is watching. But watch what happens. Flip over to 40. If you look at this now, he's sold into slavery. He's imprisoned. Watch how God continues to work with him, even in prison. He meets the cupbearer and he meets the baker. Sometimes later, chapter 40, verse 1, sometimes later, the cupbearer and the baker, the king of Egypt, offended their master, the king, and Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. Remember, even though Joseph was put in prison, again, the same statement came up, but the Lord was with Joseph, and he almost got elevated to the same rank of respect because of his integrity in the prison that he had when he was in Potiphar's house. The end of verse 4, after they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker, the king of Egypt, who were being held in the prison, had a dream the same night. And each of them had a meaning of its own. Verse 6, Joseph came to him and said to him the next morning, and he saw that they were dejected. NIV says dejected. Anybody have another translation? I didn't bring my other translation. They were dejected. What's another word? What'd they say there? They were sad, okay? They were dejected. They were sad. Is that King James? Okay, they were sad. You can tell, if you've got a relationship with somebody, you can tell when something's kind of gnawing at them. Okay? You can tell when something's not quite right. And Joseph had a relationship with these guys. Even though they were in prison together, he knew something was wrong. And so if you care about somebody long enough, you're going to kind of ask them, hey, what's wrong? They were dejected. And they're going to tell him, he's going to tell him here in just a second. When Joseph came in, so he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody of the master's house, why do you look so sad today? We both had dreams, they answered, but there's no one to interpret the dream. Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. I find that to be an interesting statement, because even in the midst of prison, what that statement tells me is Joseph had not lost his faith and his trust in God. Doesn't matter what happens, and my takeaway from that, doesn't matter what happens to us, what station we find ourselves in life, we need to always hold on to our trust and our faith in God. Sometimes we get, as people used to say, snake belly low in life, and we just kind of start beating ourselves up. That's usually the time we need to hold on to our faith in God. We need to hold on to our trust in Him. Watch this. In comments, just jump in if you want to. Any questions or comments? Watch what Joseph tells them. Verse number 8. So the cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to them, in my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vines were 3 branches, and as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and I squeezed them, and into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means, Joseph said. three branches or 3 days, and within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were the cup bearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness and mention me to Pharaoh to get me out of this prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. See, I'm encouraged again because Joseph understood I didn't do anything wrong to get here. I'm going to go ahead and serve my time. I'm going to go ahead and do my job. But if you ever get in a position to where you can help me out or look out for me, just realize I didn't do anything wrong to get put in here. That's encouraging to me because that also speaks to integrity. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve to be here, but I'm still going to go ahead and do my job regardless, and I'm going to make the best of my circumstances. And that's a lesson. That's a lesson to us. Things don't go our way all the time, but we need to do the best we can to make the best out of those circumstances and do the best we can for God. He took his brothers out of the way. He took Mrs. Potiphar out of the way. And he is really saying this thing now is about me and my relationship with God. I'm encouraged that even though Joseph was in prison, he still maintained his allegiance and his alliance to God. Questions, comments? What do you see there? Anything? Matter of fact, he was set up. I call this one Flea Temptation. I'll be right there, Mandy. And Tangina's point, my slide is coming, I promise. There it is. Whoops, that's the one. See, my attitude determines my altitude. What I think about and how I process what has happened to me, a lot of times that just because you, and I've heard people say this who have been in physical prison. I talked to one man who was actually doing some work at the house for me a few months back, who had unfortunately been in prison more than 20 years. And I just asked him, I said, hey, I'm just curious, how'd you deal with that? And he's a very pleasant man, very nice, open spirit. And he said, little brother, let me tell you something. Actually, he called me bruh man. Bruh man, let me tell you something. Just because you're in prison, your body is there. That don't mean your mind have to be. And he was there for more than 20 years. He said, I don't have anybody to blame but myself. I was young, his words, dumb and stupid. And I paid for what I did. But just because I was there, my body was there, my mind was other places. Mandy, go ahead.
And they knew his integrity by then, and it was probably easier, may not be the right word for him, when he did become Pharaoh's second in command.
Because it's gonna come back up. I mean, Potiphar's house, prison, interpreting dreams. We're on our way back up in just a minute, and then he's gonna get to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And one of these dreams is, oh, you're going to be restored. Everything's fine. The second one, oh, by the way, that dream you had about the head lifting up, yeah, your head going to be lifted up from your body. I'm sorry. I'm just I'm telling you, it's going to say it. So we need to maintain our attitude positive no matter what circumstance falls our way. Why? Because our circumstances change, but what should be consistent is our attitude and how we think about this. The end of this, I was forcibly carried off. Look out for me. You know, the chief baker, verse 16, saw Joseph had given a favorable interpretation. He said to Joseph, okay, I too had a dream, and on my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top baskets were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. But what does this mean? Sometimes don't ask the, I tell people all the time, don't ask questions you might get the answer to, okay? I can but imagine. Here's the interpretation. Joseph said 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. I'm sure that's not what he wanted to hear. I'm almost sure. I'm very sure that's not what he wanted to hear. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. And in this particular case, sometimes, you know, even in the midst of God being with you, what I get from this, you got to tell people the truth about what's going to happen and don't sugarcoat it no matter what. But you got to be careful how you actually do that. The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. He gave a feast for all of his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And just like Joseph said, but he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. And the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Wow. That's gratitude for you. But we're going to find out later on. Something's going to jog his memory, and he's going to jog his memory, and something's going to happen later on. Let me finish what I started last week, and we'll go on to 42. We're talking about ways that we need to conquer temptation. We're talking about that, how to thrive with integrity is what I really started to call this one. The third one I gave you was to conquer temptation, we must especially guard ourselves in times of success. In other words, our human nature is when things are going good, we tend to kind of forget all about doing right and forget about God. And we normally don't think about God until we think we need him, and times are in fact going bad. When successful, we'll need greater accountability. We'll need people to speak into our lives and to hold us accountable. And I think that's so true. There are times to where I need a tap on the shoulder. I need a reminder that says, hey, don't get too big for your britches, because we all are at the point to where we need God. Even though this is talking about conquering temptation, I really believe that we could apply this to more things in our life, but I'm just using this now in the scope of how we can overcome temptation. The fourth thing, to conquer temptation, we've got to seriously consider the consequences. Again, Joseph knew he did nothing wrong because of this current circumstance that he finds himself in. And when considering adultery, Solomon says the consequences last forever. The reproach will never be wiped away. In other words, that's why I'm telling you, back then, if the story was true, Mr. Potiphar would have been within his rights to have Joseph killed. The punishment for that was death. That's why I'm saying he was caught between a rock and a hard spot. And I believe he didn't exactly believe his wife, but he couldn't let Joseph go scot-free. I think y'all were right in the midst of that. And then number 5, to conquer temptation, we just got to recognize how evil sin is. And I told my children this, especially when they were going off to college. Remember what you've learned from your mother and I, But just remember this also, there are people in this world who don't share your religious conviction, and we just got to learn how to get along with each other, and that's okay. And I mentioned that, and one of the things one of my daughters learned a long time ago, she and her roommate were up arguing one night, and I happened to be at work the next day. I came in early, and she's sitting at the door of my office in tears. And I'm like, oh, Lord have mercy. It's too early for this. I didn't have no coffee. It's too early for this. She and her roommate were up talking most of the night, and the conversation came along the lines of dating, and she just asked her. She said, could you ever marry somebody who was, not black? And she said, my daughter said, what does it matter? I mean, whoever I love, whoever God sends me, I'll marry. And what upset my daughter was her roommate said, no, I couldn't do that to my parents. And my daughter was fit to be tied. When my daughter get upset about like her father, she get real quiet. She start using big words, like words this long, and she started crying. She started crying. So by the time she saw me, she said, so let me ask you a question. A brown dog mates with a black dog. What does it matter? They still gonna have puppies. I'm like, that's my girl. Again, there are people, and what I tried to teach all my children, that I had to learn. There are people who don't think like you, believe like you, act like you, smell like you, and that's okay. We just gotta all learn how to really get along. And part of that is listening. Part of that is understanding. They went on, they were roommates, they're still the best of friends, and they just agreed to disagree on that one particular thing. But my daughter reminds me of that to this day. Pop, do you remember? Yeah, I remember. It took 20 minutes away from my morning routine. I couldn't even get a cup of coffee. Yeah, I remember. But it was a different thing. What's the point? How am I tying all this in? Sometimes we got to realize that we need people in our lives that will hold us accountable. Because some of us, if in fact we get too far and too prosperous, we'll forget all about God. Matter of fact, I told my children this. I think hard times sometimes are good to keep us grounded. I think hard times should remind us that it's not about us. It's really about our relationship with God. So when you talk about conquering temptation, I think it's good to be reminded sometimes, look, God is the source of all of our resources, and we need to really understand the essence of pure evil. That's where I'm going with this. Sometimes we need to understand just how bad is, and the need for us to be salt and to be light, to live exactly what we preach. And Joseph is a good example of that. Did nothing wrong, put in prison unfairly, made the best of the situation, but is going to come out of prison, be restored, I would argue, greater than when he went in. He was working for Potiphar at first. When he comes out now, he's going to be working for Pharaoh. And all we need to do is keep our positive attitude and keep our trust and our relationship with God intact. Questions, comments? Let's go over to we must pay the cost. That's number 7. Joseph was imprisoned, but that prison was attached. I mentioned that last week. And Potiphar was really still trying to do him a solid, trying to really look out for him. And it was circumstantial evidence, I called it last week, based on the fact that she had his coat, his cloak. It was circumstantial evidence, but it really put Potiphar between a rock and a hard spot. And then to conquer temptation, we've got to trust that God's plans are better than ours. We got to trust the fact that God knows what he is doing. So even in prison, God is still working with Joseph, and he is still elevating him. Go over to 41. I won't get to 50. I was hoping to get to 50 today, but I'll give us a peek, because I want to get to the point, and then we'll be finished with Joseph, where he and his brothers come back together. I want us to spend some time on chapter 50 and really look at that next week. And we'll talk about how forgiveness plays into that. We might get to some of it today, but look at chapter 41. Look how long, at least how long he was in prison. Read the first part of 41. How long was he in there?
2 years.
About 2 years. I would say probably a little more, because it says 2 full years had passed. So probably a little more than 2 years. You are in prison a little more than 2 years for something you know you did not do. But look at this. Pharaoh had a dream, and he was standing by the Nile, and when out of the river up came 7 cows. They were sleek and they were fat, and they were grazed among the reeds. And after them 7 other cows that were ugly and gaunt came up out of the Nile and stood beside those at the riverbank. The cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. And then, this is funny to me, my biblical sense of humor, Pharaoh woke up. Well, that would get me too. You ever had a dream in the middle of the night and all of a sudden you woke up, you're sweating, you're perspiring, your heart's beating real fast? Yeah, one of those. He was having a bad dream, in fact, a nightmare. And back then, you have to understand, people put a lot more stock into dreams and dream interpretation. After that, he fell asleep again. He had a second dream. 7 heads of grain were healthy and good, and they were growing in a single stalk. And after them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, and it was thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up, and it had been a dream. In the morning, his mind was troubled. Yeah, I'll bet. So he sent for, stop, Mandy, I won't go there. He sent for the magicians and the wise men of Egypt, and Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. The chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own." Now, a young Hebrew man was there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dreams. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position. The other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he quickly brought him to the dungeon. And when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. I thought Joseph told him, when you get out of prison, remember me. I thought he said that on the day of the release. And you're telling me it was 2 years? In that I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
But didn't he remember him at the
2 years. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying? 2 years. 2 years. The point, I'm joking, but I'm serious. See, God's clock don't look like our clock. Okay? And we really need to learn. I'm talking right to me now because I'm being funny, but I'm being serious. I need to learn some patience. Just because it might be 2 years on man's clock, God is going to deliver and make things happen on his timetable, and they're always going to work out better than when I could even mess things up. Did I see your hand?
I was actually moving my hair,
Oh,
but I
I'm
was
sorry.
just thinking, if they had remembered Joseph right at the beginning, would it have had the same impact that it had 2 years later at the best time
At just the right time.
he was needed to interpret?
At just the right time. My gut tells me no. My gut tells me this is exactly the time God wanted things to happen, how the chips fall in place and how things happen. If it would have happened sooner, may not have worked out as well for Joseph, but it was right on time.
Isn't that how man thinks?
Yeah.
They didn't remember me, I told him to remember me, or I told him to do something.
I ain't heard nothing. It's been a whole 2 years.
And
Yeah.
but when it happens and we look back at the timing that things happen, then we see that was the perfect time, because if it had happened sooner, it would have messed things up. And if it had happened later, things wouldn't have been like they needed to. It happened at just the right time. And hindsight is 20/20.
Yep.
But a lot of times we'll look at something, man, I told them to remember, or I told them to do such and such and they didn't. Or I was expecting such and such at this time, but when it came, it was always the perfect time.
There are certain blessings in my life that I prayed for. And see, you got to understand something, tying in with what you just said, Tangina. I think we got to get something in our head. No doesn't necessarily mean absolutely not. No could mean not right now. Okay? There's certain blessings, there's certain things that I prayed for in my life, and it didn't happen when I wanted it to happen. So, in effect, at that moment, God said no, but he knew better than I did. Had I gotten that blessing at the time, I've told you this about the house that we really, really wanted and we wanted to buy, and somebody came and bought it out from under us, and we had a legal claim that we could have sued. It would have cost a lot more money than what we had at the time. We were lucky enough just to get our $500 earnest money back, and we called it square. Come to find out that that house had to have all new plumbing, that house had to have all new electrical, and whoever bought it, God knew, look, it's on you. And we were two broke college kids at the time, and $500 might as well have been $5,000. But we came up with that, but we couldn't have afforded to have all that work done to the house. So God knew circumstantially in his providence that there was something better for us. But we didn't whine or moan or complain. We just kept going, and God knew best, and he blessed us later, much later, with a better house. My point is, tying into Tangina's point, we got to learn that we're not on God's clock. Don't work the way ours. 2 years might have been okay. You might not have been ready before then. Now God has put you in position to where you're ready for it. A lot of the blessings that I wanted them right now, and God knew, boy, you couldn't handle it if I gave it to you. Stop. I'd have blown it. I would have messed it up every single time. So 2 years have gone by. They get Joseph out of prison, and the Pharaoh says to Joseph, verse 17 is where I am, verse 41. Chapter 41, verse 17. In my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and when I came out of the river, there were 7 cows, fat, lean, and sleek, and they all grazed among the reeds, and after them 7 other cows came up. They were scrawny and very ugly and lean, and I have never seen such ugly cows in the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first, and even after they ate them, no one can tell that they had done so, for they had looked as ugly as before. And then Pharaoh says, then I woke up. And he also recounts the dreams of the grain. Drop down to verse 25. Now this is what Joseph says to Pharaoh. The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years, and it is one and the same. And the 7 ugly, lean cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow. Then all the abundance of Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows will be so severe. The reasons of the dream was given to Pharaoh was in 2 forms. That the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do so soon. Now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and a wise man and put him in charge of the land. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance, that they should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store it up. the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and all of his officials, so Pharaoh asked him, "Can we find anyone like this man, one whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Look what God just did. Now, I'm gonna wrap this up, and we'll get to 45 and then 50 next week, and I'll finish this. Look what God just did. Not only did Joseph get a chance to interpret the dream, while he was there, God prompted him and said, "Oh, by the way, not only this is what's going on, here's a plan that you need in order to make it through those 7 tough years, those 7 years." And Pharaoh recognized, did you see the one thing that Pharaoh recognized in Joseph? And I'm going to wrap this up because I don't want to go over time. What was the one thing that Pharaoh saw in Joseph? Do you remember it? Look back in the verse. He saw something. You see it? No one, in verse 39, he says, "Since God has made this known to you, there is no one discerning and as wise as you." Now, again, guys, you got to get the power of this statement. They served many gods back then. In fact, Pharaoh was himself, in some instances, worshipped as a god. But for Pharaoh to recognize that in this polytheistic society, that's saying something. That's really saying that, talk about being salt and talk about being light. He was an example and was exactly where God put him at the time. Tangent to your point, could that have been done 2 years earlier? Probably, but it probably wouldn't have had the same effect. Because we got to be ready, and we got to be where God needs us to be at the time he needs us there. It probably could have worked, but Pharaoh wasn't troubled, his spirit wasn't troubled, and he needed somebody to interpret those dreams. Questions, comments? We're going to get to next week, and I will finish. We're going to get to, now he's over Egypt. He's over the food storage, and now the brothers are going to come back, and they're going to really, his dream's really coming true. They're really going to have to ask him for some food, and then in chapter 50, we'll get to the forgiveness factor. I can do both of those, I think, in one class next week, and then we'll move on. What I want you to get from Joseph is how our Christian life ebb and flows, but the consistency is we need to keep our faith, our hope, and our trust in God. No matter what our circumstances are, our faith and our hope and our trust in him should not waver. Final questions, comments, anything? Let's be dismissed and get ready for our morning worship. Thank you very much.